Who hired you? What's your business on this property?
A billionaire saw a homeless worker. The man looked exactly like his missing brother. A single glance started a journey back through time. The truth they discovered was absolutely shocking. The sun wasn't even up yet, but the air was already cold. It had that sharp, clean feeling that meant it had been a long, freezing night. You could see your own breath in little white clouds that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Down by the river, where the big shiny glass buildings touched the sky, a group of men stood in the shadows. They were waiting. They waited for the pickup trucks and the old vans that would drive by, looking for people to hire for a day. It was early, so early that most of the city was still asleep, dreaming its quiet, peaceful dreams. The men didn't talk much. They just shifted their weight, blew on their cold hands, and watched the street with a tired kind of hope. Hope was a thin thing out here, but it was all they had. Sometimes that was enough to keep you going. Evan was in the middle of the crowd. He wasn't a talker. He kept his hands in his pockets and his head down. He had an old backpack hanging from one shoulder. It was worn and faded, and it looked like it had been with him for a long, long time. It was a silent way of saying sorry for being there, a habit he couldn't break. The wind from the river was a cold, sharp blade. It cut right through his thin jacket and made him shiver all over. He'd slept under a bridge last night, where the concrete was cold and hard, and the wind blew right through. The sounds of the city had mixed with his dreams, turning them into a long, gray tunnel with no end. He felt like he was still in that tunnel, walking and never getting out. Soon the first trucks started to arrive. They drove slowly along the street, their headlights cutting through the dim morning light. The men in the trucks looked at the crowd. They looked for strong hands, for a certain kind of hunger in a man's eyes. They didn't really see people. They saw tools, machines that could be rented for a few hours. The drivers didn't smile or wave. They just pointed with a short nod of their head. When a truck stopped, a few men would get in. They were quiet, but you could see the relief in their shoulders as they climbed aboard. The others would just watch, feeling a little bit of their hope die with each truck that drove away. They were always the lucky ones, the ones who got picked first. By the time the sun was high enough to hit the windows of the big buildings, most of the trucks were gone. The crowd was much smaller now. The lucky ones were already working. The unlucky ones felt a new kind of cold, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the feeling of being left behind. Evan felt it too. It was a familiar feeling. He had a memory of this feeling from a long time ago, a feeling of being on the outside, looking in. He shook his head to clear the thought and started walking toward the warehouse district. He knew that was the next place to try, the last resort for men like him. He walked with a purpose that was both empty and full of need. The warehouse district was a different world. It was a place of brick and steel, where big trucks rumbled and the air smelled of dust and old wood. The ground was dirty, and the sidewalks were cracked. Most of the men who had been left behind from the first wave of hiring had walked to this part of town. They knew what to expect. They knew the work would be hard, and the pay would be small. But it was work, and work was better than nothing. They saw a sign on an old brick building. It was a big faded sign that said, "Work for cash, meals included." The letters were chipped and old, and the sign looked like it had been there for 100 years. Everyone knew what meals included meant. It meant leftovers from yesterday. It meant food that was too old to sell, but not old enough to throw away. And the cash was mostly coins, nickels and dimes and a few quarters. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a way to get a little bit of food and maybe a few dollars to hold on to. Evan joined the small group of men standing by the sign. They stood in silence, hands visible, eyes lowered. No one spoke, no one wanted to be noticed. Being noticed could be bad. It could mean you were a problem. It was a quiet kind of understanding among them all, a shared knowledge of how this part of the world worked. After a while, the warehouse door opened. A man came out. He was big and strong, and he held a clipboard. He looked at the group of men with tired eyes. It was a look that said he had seen it all before. He had seen 1,000 faces just like these. To him, they weren't people. They were numbers. Easy to count, easy to stack, easy to forget. His voice was loud, but it didn't have any feeling in it. It was the voice of a man who was very, very bored with the whole thing. He pointed with his finger. He didn't use names. He didn't even use words. He just pointed. You, and you. He pointed at 3 men, and they quickly stepped forward. The rest of the men looked down at the ground. They all held their breath. Then the foreman's voice came again, flat and cold. "Everyone else, try again tomorrow." Evan felt a flash of something that was almost like happiness. He was almost glad he wasn't chosen. He had been through this before. There were days when his pride was bigger than his hunger. Days when the thought of working in front of men who would laugh at him was worse than the emptiness in his stomach. He remembered lifting heavy boxes and the looks on their faces. It felt heavier than any box. He felt a little bit of relief that he could just walk away and not have to face that today. He had lost so much, but he still had his pride. It was a small, quiet victory in a life with few of them. But then, just as Evan was about to turn away, the foreman's voice came again. It was a little louder this time. "Wait a minute," the foreman yelled. "We need one more. You." His finger pointed right at Evan. Evan stopped. He hesitated for a moment. He thought about turning around and walking away, but his stomach rumbled. And the promise of a meal and some coins was stronger than his pride. It was a simple animal need that won the fight. He slowly stepped forward and joined the 3 other men who had been chosen. He could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't look at them. The foreman just grunted and waved them toward a big open door. It was the loading bay. The air inside the warehouse was heavy with the smell of old cardboard boxes and stale bread. It was a smell that made you feel tired just by breathing it in. As they walked in, Evan saw the first thing that would be a problem. Above the time clock, there was a small sign. No ID, no pay. The words were simple and clear. Evan stared at the sign. He had an ID once. It was in a wallet he didn't have anymore, a wallet that had been in a life he no longer lived, a life that had belonged to a house that was now owned by someone else. The sign was a punch to the gut. He felt the cold fear again. How could he get paid if he didn't have an ID? The money was everything. He had walked this far for nothing. His heart felt heavy in his chest. High above the loading bay, in a glass office, a man named Adrian Lockwood watched everything. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in his other office. The one with the soft chairs and the polished wood floors. The one where he was ushered through quiet hallways, and everyone spoke in low, respectful voices. But he couldn't sleep. He had flown across the country last night, and the time difference had him wide awake in the middle of the night. He had decided to come to the warehouse. He wanted to see what it was like, to walk through a part of his company that he never saw. He was 57 years old. His name was on big buildings and on the side of ships that crossed oceans. He was a very rich man. People said he had everything, and he did. He had a great car, a beautiful house, and more money than he could ever spend. But there were nights when he felt empty, nights when he felt like his tailored suit was too tight, and the inside of his chest was hollow. On those nights he thought about his brother, a small boy running down a hallway, and the sound of a door that closed and never opened again. He had built a life of steel and glass, but it was fragile on the inside. Adrian's brother, Thomas, had been just 12 years old when he disappeared. He had been in a foster home, a temporary place for a few months. But one day, he just wasn't there anymore. He vanished without a word. Adrian's family had spent so much money looking for him. They hired the best lawyers and detectives. They used their powerful name, but nothing worked. The money that could do anything everywhere else could only buy silence here. They could never find out what happened. Over the years, people had told Adrian that grief gets easier, that the pain gets lighter over time. But he had learned the opposite. He had learned that grief was a heavy stone. It just found new places to sit inside you, always pushing, always there. It was a part of him now, a constant weight. He was just about to turn and go back to his office when he saw the new men walk in. He saw them file past the time clock. And then he saw one of them move in a way that made the stone in his chest feel very, very heavy. The man was thin. He looked older than he probably was. His clothes were ragged, but the tilt of his head, the way his shoulders were so narrow, and the way he reached up with his left hand to rub his side, as if he was remembering an old pain. Adrian knew these movements. He knew them the way a mother knows her child's face. He grabbed the cold metal railing of the balcony, his knuckles turning white. It couldn't be. Could it? A crazy, impossible hope started to bloom inside him. The foreman, a man named Dale, was in a bad mood. His patience was gone. He looked at the new workers and threw a bundle of thick work gloves on the ground. They landed with a thud. The gloves hit Evan's shoulder. "Careful," Evan said, but not in an angry way. It was just a small sound, a simple human protest. Dale smiled. It was a mean kind of smile. The kind of smile a person has when they are enjoying being mean. "You'll get careful when you've earned careful," he said. The other men chuckled a little bit. It was a nervous sound. They just wanted to make sure they were on the foreman's side. Dale pointed to a huge stack of flour sacks that was leaning against the wall. The sacks were so tall they looked like they might fall at any second. "You," he said, pointing at Evan. "Hobo hero. Move those to the truck. Double time." The words were like a slap. Evan didn't say anything. He just walked to the stack. He grabbed the first bag and lifted it onto his shoulder. A familiar burning pain shot through his ribs. It was from an old injury, a long-ago broken rib that had never quite healed right. He didn't think about it much anymore. He didn't give it a name because names made you want to talk about it, and talking about it meant people would ask questions. He didn't want to answer questions. So, he just carried the pain. It was an old friend he had learned to live with. Evan began to work. He moved slowly but steadily. He lifted one sack, carried it to the truck, and then came back for another. With each sack he lifted, a small cloud of white flour dust rose into the air. Soon the dust covered his clothes, his hair, and his beard. He looked like a ghost. He felt like one too. As he worked, he could hear Dale clicking his tongue. The sound was like a clock ticking, but a mean clock that was telling him to go faster. Dale wanted him to fail. He wanted to see him drop a sack or stumble. It was a small game for him, but for Evan, it was his whole world for the next few hours. He just kept going. He moved sack after sack. The pain in his ribs was a constant ache. The dust in the air made his chest feel tight. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He had to keep moving. He had to earn that money and that meal. He had to keep going to make it to tomorrow. Adrian from his balcony watched the whole thing. He watched the man move. He watched the man stumble a little bit when the pain got bad. He watched the man's hands rub his side. Every move was a memory. Every little thing was something he had seen before. He couldn't stand it anymore. He had to get closer. He had to know. Adrian came down the metal stairs, his steps loud in the quiet of the warehouse. He felt like he was walking into an old photograph. The air was colder down here. It felt different from the clean air in his office. He walked toward the loading bay just as Evan lifted another flour sack. This time, Evan stumbled hard. He almost fell. A small hissing sound came out of his mouth. It was the same sound he used to make when he got hit hard during a soccer game back when they were kids. Adrian's heart felt like it was going to burst. Dale saw Evan stumble and told another worker to leave him alone. "If he wants the work, he can do it," Dale said. Adrian walked up to them. He hadn't planned to say anything, but the words came out on their own. "What's his name?" he asked. Dale looked at Adrian's suit and then at Evan. He quickly tried to figure out what was going on. "Doesn't matter," Dale said. "They come, they go." Adrian looked at Dale. His voice was very quiet, but it was stronger than a shout. "It matters," he said. Then he turned to Evan. He looked at Evan's face for the first time. The jaw was thinner and the eyes were tired, but it was him. It was the face he had seen in his mother's old Bible for decades. "What's your name?" Adrian asked again, and his voice was shaking. He had to hear the name. Evan looked at Adrian. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the rich suit and the fancy shoes. He looked at the expensive watch. He felt like names were tickets, and he couldn't afford one. He was just a number. "Evan," he said finally. Adrian repeated the name, but softer this time. It sounded like a word he hadn't said for a very long time. "Evan?" Dale rolled his eyes. He wanted to get back to work. "If you're done with the introductions, we have a truck to load." "We're done," Adrian said, and the way he said it made Dale and the other men look down. Adrian took a step closer. He wasn't afraid of the flour dust. He reached out and gently pulled up the corner of Evan's sleeve. He didn't touch his skin. He just looked at his arm. There, on the forearm, was a thin white scar. It went across his arm in a small line. It was like a little comma, a punctuation mark he had known since childhood. A jagged scar from a bicycle crash, and a very, very bad idea. Adrian felt his breath catch in his throat. This was it. The scar. The proof. He knew this scar. It was the last piece of the puzzle. He knew it was him. A certainty settled in his bones, solid and unbreakable. Adrian's hand trembled as he let go of Evan's sleeve. The scar was the same. The face was the same. The way he moved was the same. It was all the same. He looked at Evan, his eyes wide. "Come with me," he said. He didn't ask. It was an order. Then he looked at Dale. "Pay him for the day." Dale didn't want to. "He hasn't finished," he said. "Neither have I," Adrian answered, and that was the end of the conversation. They walked out of the warehouse. The wind from the river was still cold. Evan walked a little behind Adrian. He wasn't sure what was happening. Was he being helped? Was he being arrested? Was this some kind of sick joke? He felt very, very confused. They walked to a black car that was sitting on the street. It was a long, beautiful car that looked like it cost a fortune. "I know someone who looked like you," Adrian said finally. "My brother." Evan didn't say anything. He just stared at the ground. It was too big of a word to hear from a stranger. "Ride with me," Adrian said, opening the door. Evan didn't move. "Just for coffee," Adrian said. "And after that, you can tell me to go to hell if you want." He offered a small bit of power back to Evan, a choice he hadn't had in a long time. The cafe Adrian chose was a place with soft music and warm lights. The chairs were soft and didn't wobble. As soon as they sat down, the server came over. She looked at Evan's old clothes and then at Adrian's expensive suit. Her eyes moved back and forth. She was trying to figure out what was happening. Adrian just smiled and ordered 2 coffees and a sandwich. Then, after a moment, he ordered a second sandwich. He saw the hunger in Evan's eyes. Evan ate his sandwich slowly, carefully. He hadn't eaten in a while, and his body was not sure what to do with the food. Adrian just watched him. He felt a deep, warm feeling in his chest, a feeling of gratitude, a feeling of sitting next to a miracle. The silence was long and a little bit awkward. Adrian finally broke it. "Why are you on the street?" he asked. Evan stopped eating. He rubbed the scar on his arm. It was like a worry stone. "My wife got sick," he said. His voice was rough. "The insurance didn't cover enough. Then the house went. Then I just got angry. I stayed angry. The anger burned everything that tried to help. After she died, I just kept moving. So, I wouldn't have to stop and see what I lost." Adrian listened to every word. He felt the pain in Evan's voice. He knew what that kind of pain felt like. Adrian took a deep breath. He looked at Evan. "I had a brother," he said, and he told the story. But he told the short version, the version without the money and the lawyers. Just a boy, a door, and a silence that grew and grew until it was all you could hear. He told the story of a boy who just vanished, and the feeling of loss that never went away. He spoke of the emptiness in his life, the missing piece of his heart. When he finished, Evan just stared into his coffee cup. He didn't say anything. Adrian waited. He didn't push. He knew how it felt to lose something, to have a hole in your life. "There's a shelter on 9th Street, Adrian said. "They have showers. I can drive you there. And then maybe we can go to a place that might have an answer we can't see from here." Evan looked up. He didn't nod because he trusted the man. He nodded because there was a tiny, tiny part of him that felt hope. Hope was a stubborn thing. It was a muscle he thought had died, but it was still there. The car smelled like clean leather. Evan sat stiffly, his hands on his knees. He watched the city go by in the car window. Adrian didn't say anything. He just drove. They stopped at the shelter. Evan went inside with a small towel and came out 20 minutes later. He looked the same, but different. The dust was gone. He looked less haunted. Adrian opened the trunk and took out a clean shirt from his gym bag. He offered it to Evan. Evan looked at the shirt, then at Adrian. He was afraid of owing a debt he couldn't repay. "It's a loan," Adrian said, "not a gift." They drove away from the river and the city's towers. They went north into a different kind of neighborhood. This was a place with houses that had porches and big trees. The houses were not new, but they were well cared for. The paint was old, but it looked like it was cared for with love. The house they stopped at was the kind of house a teacher might own after a long life. It wasn't fancy, but it felt warm. Adrian got out of the car. Evan just watched him. A woman with soft gray hair and gentle eyes opened the door. When she saw Adrian, she put her hands on his arms. Her touch was full of love. "Adrian," she said. Adrian looked at Evan. "Maureen," he said, "this is Evan." Maureen looked at Evan. She wasn't judging his clothes or his face. She was looking at him with the eyes of a nurse. She was looking at his posture, the tired lines around his eyes, the places where pain had left its marks. "Come in," she said, her voice building a bridge between them. They went inside. The house smelled of old books and tea. It was a comforting smell. Adrian explained why they were here. Maureen had been a neighbor to the Lockwood boys when they were young. She had bandaged their scraped knees. She had driven their mother to the hospital a long time ago. She listened to Adrian now, her eyes bright and patient. When Adrian was finished, she turned to Evan. Her voice was gentle. "May I see your hands?" Evan held out his hands. His palms were up. It was like he was showing her the truth. It was a simple act, but it felt like a very big thing to do. He felt like he was putting all his secrets out in the open. Maureen took his hands. She was so gentle. She ran her finger over a small, half-moon-shaped scar near the bottom of his left thumb. She smiled. It was a sad kind of smile, but it was also a knowing smile. She looked at the scar, and then she looked at Evan's face. She nodded her head. It was a small, knowing movement. "There was a bicycle," she said softly, "and a mailbox that wouldn't move." The old clock in the living room ticked. The tea on the table was getting cold. Evan sat there, hunched over. His hands were still in Maureen's. The scar on his thumb felt like it was pulling him back to a past he had worked so hard to forget. A past that he had buried so deep he thought it was gone forever. Adrian didn't say anything. He just stared at the two of them. He had spent his whole life building a company, building towers of glass and steel. But all of that felt small now. It all felt like nothing. He felt like he was being undone by a small line of scar tissue on a stranger's hand. Maureen looked at Adrian. Her voice was just a whisper. "It's him, isn't it?" she asked. Adrian swallowed hard. He felt like he was going to cry. "It has to be," he said. "Nobody else? No one else has that scar. No one else has that look." The words felt dangerous. They were filled with so much hope and so much fear. He said his brother's name. "My brother, Thomas." The words were out in the open now. Evan pulled his hands back from Maureen's. He looked at both of them. His eyes were so tired. He shook his head slowly. "You're mistaken," he said. His voice was flat. "I don't know you. I don't know this house. And I'm not anyone's brother." He looked at Adrian. Adrian's face was full of hope and pain. "You are," Adrian said, his voice firm. "You're Thomas. You're the brother who disappeared all those years ago." The name hit Evan like a hammer. He flinched just a little. Not enough for most people to see. But Maureen saw it. She saw the flicker in his eyes. He shook his head again, faster this time. "No. My name is Evan. I don't know who you think I am, but you're wrong." Adrian leaned forward. He had to make him understand. He had to make him see the truth. "Then tell me," Adrian said. "Where did you learn to rub your ribs like that when you're lifting something heavy? My brother had a cracked rib from falling off a barn when he was 10. You do it the same way. And the scar? The one from the bicycle? You can't fake that. You have the same scar. You tilt your head the same way when you're thinking. You're my brother." Evan stood up very fast. He grabbed his old backpack. He had to leave. He had to get out of this house. He had to get away from these people who were trying to pull him back into a past he had buried. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. He walked to the door. Adrian stood up too. His voice was strong. "Evan Thomas, wait." The name made Evan freeze in the doorway. He stood there, his back to them, for a long moment. "You may not believe me," Adrian said, "but at least let me prove it." Evan slowly turned his head. His eyes were hard now. "How?" he asked. "How do you plan to do that?" Adrian looked at him, and his heart was pounding. "A DNA test," he said. "One swab, one test. If I'm wrong, you can walk away and never see me again. If I'm right," he stopped. He was afraid to say the words out loud. "If I'm right, you come home." The silence was very heavy. Finally, after a long time, Evan spoke. "I'll think about it," he said. And then he was gone. The door closed quietly behind him. The next few days were very long. For Adrian, time moved so slowly it felt like it had stopped. He couldn't think about his company. He couldn't read his financial reports. All the numbers looked like his brother's face. He started going back to the places where the day laborers gathered. He just walked around looking at every face. He hoped to see Evan again. Sometimes he thought he saw him from a distance. A man in a tired coat walking down an alley. A person getting in line at a shelter. But every time Adrian got closer, the man would be gone. It was like he was a ghost. Adrian felt hopeless. He didn't know if Evan would ever agree to the test. Finally, on the 5th day, Adrian went to the shelter. He asked the person at the front desk to give Evan an envelope. Inside the envelope, he had written a note. It was in his neat handwriting. "I don't want to hurt you," the note said. "I only want the truth. If you let me prove it, you will never owe me anything. Please meet me at the clinic on 12th Street, on Wednesday at 2 p.m. He left the note and prayed. He prayed that Evan would be there. Wednesday came. It was a gray and cold day. A light rain was falling, making the sidewalks wet. Adrian got to the clinic very early. His chest felt tight. He felt sick. He didn't know if Evan would come. He had never felt this nervous about anything in his life. He watched the door. He watched every person who came in. He was ready to be disappointed. He was ready to feel the stone in his chest get heavier. But then, at exactly 2:07 p.m., the door opened, and Evan walked in. His hair was wet from the rain. His coat was heavy and dark. He looked like a man who was walking into a trap he already knew was there. He walked up to Adrian. "Just one test," he said flatly. Adrian just nodded. He was too afraid to speak. The nurse came and took a swab from inside their cheeks. She put the samples in 2 little bags. She told them the results would be ready in 3 days. 3 days felt like 3 years. Adrian couldn't sleep. He carried his phone everywhere. He checked it all the time. He felt like his whole life was waiting for one phone call. When the results came, Adrian opened the envelope with shaky hands. The paper felt like a piece of history. It said, 99.87% probability of full sibling relationship. The words blurred. His vision got watery. His heart, which had been hurting for so long, felt a huge wave of something new and strong. It was joy. But joy was not enough. He rushed to the shelter to find Evan. He showed him the paper. Evan looked at it. He didn't look happy or sad. He just looked at it for a long time. Then he folded his arms. "So what?" he said. His voice was cold. "So I have the same blood as you. That doesn't change anything. You live in a big house. I sleep under a bridge. You have everything. I have nothing. We're not brothers. We're just strangers with the same blood." Adrian felt his voice break. "You're not nothing. You're my brother. I've been looking for you my whole life." Evan shook his head. "Maybe you looked," he said, "but nobody found me. Nobody cared enough back then. And now I'm just a charity case." A nice thing for a rich man to feel good about saving. Adrian took a step closer. His eyes were burning. "Don't you dare say that," he said. "You think this is for my pride? This is because I lost you once, and I won't lose you again." Evan made a fist with his hands. For a moment, it looked like he might hit Adrian, but he just turned and walked away. He walked back out into the rain. The weeks after that were a battle. Adrian tried everything. He bought Evan new clothes. He offered him an apartment. He tried to get him to meet people, but every time, Evan pushed him away. He wasn't ready to be the missing brother. He wasn't ready to be seen. It was Maureen who finally helped. She found him sitting behind a church, smoking a cigarette. She sat down next to him. "You think being found is a burden," she said, "but being lost is heavier." Something in her words made a crack in the wall Evan had built around himself. The big change came one night when Adrian invited Evan not to a dinner, but to their mother's grave. It was late. The cemetery was quiet. Leaves were on the ground. Adrian stood by the headstone. "She prayed for you every night," he whispered. "Even when everyone told her you were gone, she never stopped." Evan stood there for a long time. His voice came out low and rough. "I thought nobody wanted me," he said. "I thought I was a mistake." Adrian knelt down and touched the headstone, too. "You were never a mistake," he said. "You're my brother, my only brother." The silence between them broke. Evan knelt down and touched the headstone, and for the first time in a very long time, he cried. Life didn't change in one night. Trust didn't come back in a single moment. But slowly, carefully, Adrian and Evan began to meet in the middle. Adrian got him a job at his company, a real job, not charity. Evan learned to drive a forklift and sort shipments. He started to wash more, to shave his beard. He started to accept the help. One night, a few months later, snow was falling outside Adrian's home. The brothers were sitting by the fire. "Do you still think we can be brothers again?" Evan asked quietly. Adrian looked at him. His voice was thick with feeling. "We already are." The fire crackled, the snow fell, and in that room filled with memories and hope, the two brothers who had been lost for so long were finally home.